Hello, and welcome to Conversations with the Reverend G. I am Reverend Grenetta Mason, aka Reverend G, and I'm here every Monday night on WEMS Radio live from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., bringing you conversations with guests from all walks of life. My guests, they have all different perspectives and they bring great information about their careers and information to share to support us in, my motto is living your best life. We talk about life, we talk about love, and we talk about spirituality. We talk about spirituality from a practical point of view. How does it support you in your everyday life? What practices do you have right at hand that can support you when you're feeling down or when you need clarity? I talk about the spiritual toolkit. And the spiritual toolkit are those practices that are personal to you, the ones that you use on a consistent basis that you can go to. So we look for different things to put into our spiritual toolkit. So when we talk to different guests, we talk about things that work for us, and you may be able to try some of the different practices for yourself. I talk a lot about creativity because I think creativity becomes really a part of your spiritual practices also. And generally, we talk about maybe writing as a spiritual practice, but there's so many other ways that you can use your creativity to support you and have it in your little spiritual toolbox. You can find me every day on Facebook as Reverend Grenetta Mason and on Instagram as Rev Grenetta. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel as Grenetta Briggs Mason. I'm excited tonight to have you join me. I have a special guest, Dr. Anthony Cannon. He's an endocrinologist, and I'm excited that he'll be able to join us tonight. And we'll talk about some of the issues with COVID and the variant, and we'll talk about spiritual practices. I am here to support you in living your best life with joy and with grace and ease. And one of the ways I find that works is if you have a consistent practice that you do. For me, consistency is really important because I find that when I get off my practice, let's say, so I could go and I remember I was in a challenge and every day I had to walk like 10,000 steps a day and I was in it. And every day, consistently, I made that challenge. But as soon as the challenge was over, I caught myself taking a break for a week. After that break turned from 1 week to 2 weeks, right? And I'm still finding myself creating a consistent walking pattern. I'm walking, but it's still not at the same level. So it's really about having that practice. And when you don't do it consistently, being able to get back to it. And most of the time, we do things consistently. So in our spiritual practices, that's also important. It looks like we might be having technical difficulty because I'm waiting for Dr. Cannon to show up. Right? Um, so let's hold it down. One of the other things that I think is important as we look at the holiday season coming up. And I always talk about, let's live our life and be in joy. But I do understand that during this time, they have many people who aren't just excited and really happy, and they go through a lot of different trauma during the holiday season. And what I also like to point out is how mental health is really important. And I think because we've been through so much trauma over the past 2 years added on to if you have seasonal depression, it could be a lot. So I like to make sure that I'm always promoting people getting to get help, finding somebody that can support you. I was talking to a friend the other day, and one of the things that we do is think that we could do it ourselves. Oh, I got this. I could take care of it myself, right? But that's not always the case. I always encourage people to look for support. And in looking for that support, it will help you get through whatever you're going through. Um, the other thing is that it's the season to be jolly, and I hope that at some point we can find something that will support us in enjoying the season. I know I talk about it's up with some people, it's like the season of depression, but also I like to see if how can we support people, that are going through a lot from now, from COVID and now and into this season. Also, one of the things that I think is also important is that I'm getting a message that he's having a trouble with his camera. So we'll see. Hopefully he'll be here soon. It's always like the show must go on and we have these technical difficulties. So I'm here. Um, I was excited for him to come in. And talk to us. Are you here? You said you can unmute. Is it that a camera problem or what? Prophet, do you see him? Okay, so, all right. So they're trying to come in now. What else could we talk about? Um, Spiritual practices. So I have several spiritual practices that I do. I like to do writing. Writing is one of those things that I find that it's one of the newer practices that I've been doing. And I find that if I find the time to consistently write for at least 5 minutes a day, I'm finding that I'm building up in my writing. And I used to be one to not to reject the writing part, but it also found that by doing it consistently, I've started to enjoy it and I've started to get better at it. And it's the whole idea of continuing to stick with it and do it and make it work for me. So, writing is one of those practices that I'm now doing in a consistent way and I'm seeing the results of that. It's like I talk about the creativity part of it all, right? And using your creativity to support you. What else are they saying? All right, they still talking about trying to fix this up, right? Who is this motion? Yes. Um, Another thing that I think is important in living your best life, because for me, I've been doing comedy, um, anything that makes me feel good, right? Singing, improv. So I do a lot of creative things. And I was laughing the other day because I was like, oh, I want to do photography. Oh, I want to be a painter. So I want to do a lot of different things, right? And I think that supports me in finding the joy, just going for all the creativity and all the different things that I want to do. Are we good with Dr. Cannon? Yes, come on in, Dr. Cannon, and let's move this conversation. Hello. It's good to see you. I was out here trying to talk about a whole lot of things. Can we hear you? You have to unmute now. I was so excited about this conversation, um, to give people glimpse into what's going on. So introduce yourself. I'm glad you finally here. Well, we can't hear you. Can't hear you. Are you still muted on your end? It's very interesting. Unmute. Oh, you have to unmute your mic. Oh, it's down there on the bottom of the screen. You see the mic there? Okay. We will get this show going in a minute. All of a sudden, everything will pop in and we'll get it going. One thing I like to talk about too, that I could talk about, are the thoughts that we keep. I know that when I talk to people, and I always say, one of the things you'll always hear me say is, what thoughts are you keeping? And I think that when we look at how we're feeling and how things are going for us, if we can watch our thoughts, if we could look at the thoughts that we're keeping, if somehow we can even control our thoughts, and I know we can, but how often do we sit and say, oh, well, what thoughts am I keeping, right? And what thoughts am I keeping that would have this be so in my life? And so when I look at life from this perspective of how the thoughts you keep are important, I think about the times when I'm sad. Like today, I've been melancholy, right? That's the word I use. I'm not like down and sad, very sad, but I've been upset. A good friend of mine is transitioning. I found out that one of my directors died, and all of that just hit me like in a way where I just had to sit back and stop and think today. And I had to really monitor the thoughts that I was keeping, because I could have gone down the whole negative rabbit hole where I would have been really sad. But I tried to just sit in what is, but not think about the negative part of it. Just try to find a space where I felt comfortable and having positive thoughts. And one way that I found today that it worked for me to keep from going into like this really low place was I used gratitude. I just started thinking about the things that I'm grateful for. I started to do a little gratitude practice, and that always brings me back out of like, wow, there's so many things that I can be grateful for. So that gratitude practice is one of the practices that I use often, and I used it today to support me to be here tonight, to show up and have this happen, right? To show up and have to wait for everybody to get in and wait to share this information that I wanted Dr. Cannon to share tonight. Okay. Can't hear you. Very interesting. This is the first time we've had a muted problem, right? We can see you, but we can't hear you. That's the whole thing. Oh, okay. Well, you're gonna start. We're gonna try to be on the phone. Um, yeah.
Good evening.
Great.
I'm on my smartphone and off my computer. Can you hear me now?
Absolutely. Yep.
So
Yeah.
sorry for the disruption in technology. I remember so much in the past. I remember the revolution will be televised.
Right. If the revolution will not be televised, it will be.
Exactly. Exactly. I would like to thank everyone who's listening tonight. I'm very thankful and blessed to be here tonight and not to be persuaded by technology. I'm going to be speaking from this phone, and I will be giving you some background information, I hope useful on the discussion of COVID-19 and diabetes. I would first like to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Anthony Cannon. I'm a clinical endocrinologist. I work for Jefferson Health System in the Philadelphia area. It's a large hospital healthcare network. I'm one of their senior endocrinologists. I spend most of my day treating patients with diabetes. I have been very much impressed with the work of Miss Briggs and her show. I asked to be part of this because I thought it was a very important topic to which to discuss and to give you some of my ideas on COVID-19 and the importance of listening to thought leaders and not to social media. We're in the middle of a major pandemic, the likes of which we've not seen for over 100 years.
Mm.
And we're seeing wave after wave of various variants of this mutated virus causing harm to people of all persuasions, particularly people who are Black and brown. It's a discriminatory disorder. It tends to take people who are first liners and put them in great risk and harm. It's a time that we have to mobilize all that we have spiritually to use our intellect to be better than those around us, to seek a future that includes us.
Mm.
I tell all my patients that I see who are high risk, which is over 75% of the people I see daily, because we know that diabetes and high blood pressure, cholesterol problems, strokes, heart attacks, those with cancers who are on chemotherapy and immunotherapy, our brothers and sisters with multiple sclerosis and other immunologic diseases that we treat accordingly with damaged immune systems are very susceptible to this organism. At one point, 40% of the people who died as a consequence of COVID-19 in this country were indeed suffering from diabetes or prediabetes. Those numbers have slightly improved. But what I'd like to do is speak the truth, speak factually to you, to allow you the opportunity to hear from a thought leader and come to your own conclusions tonight. I would like to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes bringing you into my world and see how I practice on a daily basis with my patients. I have a very short slide deck which I'd like to share with you. It's a deck which I just gave to the public at a senior citizens facility nearby. It's called COVID-19 and Pre-Existing Comorbidities of Diabetes, Obesity, and Cardiovascular Disease. Over a 21 months time period, severe acute respiratory syndrome 2, called SARS-CoV-2, or as we call it COVID-19 pandemic, has centered on several different disease states, particularly diabetes as the contributing factor to morbidity and death, devastating our population, again with the emphasis on Black and brown people. Our background information is to know what we're up against. It's a coronavirus. It belongs to a large family of viruses which may cause illnesses in animals or humans. There are many types of human coronaviruses, including some that commonly cause mild upper respiratory tract infections. COVID-19 is caused by a novel or new form coronavirus causing severe acute respiratory syndrome. Coronavirus 2, as I said earlier, this is truly a new disease not
Mhm.
previously seen in the past. The COVID-19 symptoms, we have to recognize them for what they are. They average over 5 to 6 days after being infected and can last up to 14 days after exposure. We have a dry cough, we have fever, we're tired, we're short of breath, we often have chest pain, we lose our ability to smell, to speak, and to interact with those around us. We have diffuse body aches, we have headaches, we have gastrointestinal problems, particularly diarrhea. You can have a rash, you can have eye inflammation. It's estimated that 30% of people with coronavirus infections in the US are asymptomatic. These are the people that shed and affect the rest of us. There was really remarkable data looking at the contact of this organism. Close contact is important. We have to stay 6 feet apart from each other. We have to be concerned about droplets from each other, staying anywhere from 3 to 6 feet apart. It is an airborne transmitted virus, and it's not on contaminated surfaces as we thought. So all of the hygiene that we do is important, but it would appear our surfaces are safer than we thought. Over 59% of COVID-19 transmission might be from an asymptomatic individual. These are people who did not develop symptoms initially when they were affected. And they can actually be pre-symptomatic for a period of days before having the actual infection that sheds. We are emphasizing face covering, masking, using respirators, N95 respirators, which we use in the hospitals, N94 respirators. I implore you during these times of wave after wave of variant viruses, COVID-19 persuasion, to wear the best masks that you can and be distant from individuals who you think may be infected. We tell all our patients wear a mask, stay 6 feet apart, avoid crowds and poorly ventilated spaces, and above all, wash your hands. The alcohol in what you're using to wash your hands has to be at least 60% of the solution. This disease affects older adults, racial and ethnic minorities. I spoke about those with cancer, chronic kidney disease I didn't mention, and lung diseases, those who have the Alzheimer's and other dementias. But particularly diabetes, both type 1 and type 2 are affected, those with Down syndromes and those with heart disease, weakened hearts, people who've had very severe bouts of hypertension, those who have HIV. These are all high-risk groups. Those who have well-described immunocompromised status, those who are pregnant, but particularly those who are overweight and obese in our society. This is the number one risk factor for COVID-19. Obesity is a pro-inflammatory state, which means that there are inflammatory markers in obesity from our fat cells, our adipocytes, that make us susceptible to the virus.
Wow.
Those with abnormalities of sickle cell trait and sickle cell disease, as well as those who smoke amongst us. Solid organ issues, people who have end-stage kidney disease, who've had renal transplants or heart transplants, who are on immunosuppressive drugs. These are the people at the greatest risk. We talked about the commonly reported short-term symptoms, but there's something called long COVID. Up to 1/3 of individuals with COVID will suffer from long COVID syndrome of fatigue, shortness of breath, cough, chest pain, joint pain, and quality of life issues. The considerations I gave you earlier, those with pain and discomfort, continue for months. We are not clear when this will end for these people. We consider it long COVID syndrome when it's more than 3 months after the acute infection. I want to emphasize all the studies I've reviewed has really emphasized several risk groups, but I want to get back to obesity and hypertension. I misquoted the relative ratio of the two. About 40% of people are overweight or obese, and about 58% of people have hypertension. About 36 to 40% of those with the affliction of COVID-19 have diabetes. but no one person only has one of these things. So when you put this in a homunculus of an African American male or female, Latino, Latinx, brother and sister, these are people that are extraordinarily high risk, particularly when obesity is a commonality in these metabolic derangements.
That's good.
Now, if we looked at something that we saw early on, data from last year, January through March of 2020, we saw something dramatic. We saw a great loss of our nursing home grandparents, great grandparents, and grandmothers. Our relatives, our aunts and uncles who may have been in these facilities. It turned out that those over 85 perished, uniformly perished with this disease. But yet, when you look at the infectivity numbers, the people who were most afflicted with the disease was not our near elderly and elderly in terms of numbers. It was those 20 to 60 years of age who went on to live. But if you look at those over 80, 85 years of age, their mortality rates were phenomenal, but the numbers of people that they represented from the early waves was much smaller than you thought. Younger people survive more often and often shedded more virus to family members. I speak to my patients about the Trojan horse and the recognition that those we love are the very people we allow to come into our homes who are under-vaccinated or unvaccinated. You have to know the status of those who come into your homes because unwillingly, these people can come and leave disease at your doorstep. If we were to look at the highest risk groups in the world for COVID, you may not have known that the American Indians, our indigenous population, is the highest risk group. Their ratio compared to whites is 3.3 to 1. African Americans are 2.0 to 1. Our Latino brothers and sisters are 2.4 to 1, and Pacific Islanders are 2.6 to 1. These are the highest risk groups. Who are our Amazon drivers? Who's working front lines in Walmart? Who is serving us food and serving us at diners and restaurants? These are the types of people who are at greatest risk for getting the disease, transmitting the disease, and dying of the disease. So when I speak about COVID-19, I think about the consonants of health, we call it, in terms of health data. Look at the housing instability in our people. Many of us are in crowded situations. We can't separate. We can't be in the right place to protect ourselves and our families. We're often undercapitalized. We're renting. We're under control of the man. Our residents are crowded. They're in low-income housing and shelters. We're socially isolated. We are often in long-term facilities, be it a prison, be it a nursing home, incarcerated in other ways. We don't have the ability to protect our health. We deal with prejudice. We deal with discrimination. All these factors factor in to why people of color are having such a bear of a time. It's not that we're not vaccinated. We can't get vaccinated. Look at the initial data of vaccinations in this country. African Americans and Latinos were at the bottom of the barrel initially when these vaccines were available. Our neighborhoods were not the first neighborhoods which the CVSs and the Walmarts and other facilities went to. We had to wait our turn like so much in life. And food insecurity is another issue I'd like to speak about. Your health is at risk if you don't have proper nourishment. Ms. Briggs and I spoke of spirituality. I'm extremely spiritual in my belief. I believe that if God wanted us to live, he would provide a means for us to live, and that is the vaccine. Not just getting one or two, but getting your booster. We now know we have Omicron. We have another variant, which I have already begun to study. I am absolutely convinced it's more transmissible than Delta variant. I don't have the data, won't have the data for 2 weeks to know if our vaccines can appropriately extinguish this risk, but we are testing our vaccines to the max. There are more mutations on what's called a spike protein of this particular organism than anything we've seen to date. That includes alpha and delta and other variants. So we have to pray that what we're doing is going to cause us to live and not to be inflicted or afflicted with this disease and spread it to others. So when I speak to you about diabetes, it's from my passion, it's from my training. I spent most of my adult life professionally training to become an endocrinologist, to take care of our people and other people with this affliction, and to see so many of my patients come down with COVID. Even those I spoke to and I speak to on a daily basis who refuse to be vaccinated, I'm seeing them afflict not only themselves but their families with something I think that is preventable in most cases. I will give you a opinion from a recent week of my life where I rounded in the hospital. I had 50 consults about 4 months ago in 1 week by myself with no assistance from over 3 different hospitals. I spend a whole week going from one to the other hospitals. All 50 consults were very sick people, but over 40 of them were COVID positive. COVID positive.
Mm.
And of that week, we lost a third of those patients despite the best efforts we could possibly put together. And this is a part of the country where I am in New Jersey, which is not as severely affected with the inundation of COVID. We still lost a third of those patients, most of them in ICU settings. So what I tell you is that we're looking at a point in time where our healthcare workers are exhausted. The vaccine is available. The ability to protect yourself and your family is there. And yet, I was just in the hospital 2 weeks ago, and we have a brand new ICU in one of our hospitals with 24 beautiful enlarged rooms with every convenience possible to save human life. 12 of those beds was COVID positive patients, and 100% of them were unvaccinated.
Wow.
100%. So the rhetoric about the COVID vaccines not protecting individuals is incorrect. When we get affected by the virus, particularly the Delta variant, we tend not to come to the hospital and we tend to do better.
Mhm.
One of my patients told me with tears in her eyes after losing her mother to COVID-19, she said to me over and over in the office, I just want to live. And I want to take that statement to all that are listening here tonight. We all should want to live. We should pray that we make the right decisions for ourselves, our families, our communities. Our healthcare workers are exhausted. If you could see the routines in the ICU to keep COVID-19 patients alive, it will stun you to see what the nurses and doctors and other the unit clerks are doing and others to keep people alive. Many of those omissions could have been avoided if we all worked together in a pandemic and recognize that we have individual rights which are respectful, but we have the right to let other people live the lives that God had meant for them. And I'll stop at that point.
Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. As I sat here, what came to mind was, most of us want to know, how do we protect ourselves and what do we do, when it comes to all the new variants and all that. And then I heard you say that you won't know for a while whether the vaccines that we currently have will support this new Omicron. So what are you suggesting we do? Just continue to get vaccinated, get the vaccine, and how do we move forward here? Because it doesn't look like, it's like people are now taking off their mask and kind of coming outside and being free in games. What are you suggesting that we do now?
I think, to be honest with you, the basis of my talk tonight was based on hand washing, wearing the proper mask, socially distancing. And I know this is difficult because for much of the country, it's now late fall, early winter, and people are coming indoors. Our HVAC systems in most of our older neighborhoods, our apartment buildings, are not suitable to protect you from the airborne spread of the disease. I am a big fan of N95 and N94 respirators. I don't wear typical masks that you may be wearing. In the hospital and beyond, in my clinic, I wear N94. And these masks are now down to as little as $1.20 a mask and can be reliably used for up to 12-hour shifts in the hospital without having to change them. These masks are the ones I particularly prefer are from South Korea. They're called KFN94. I'll say it again, KFN94. They're almost to the same specs as an N95. They're much more comfortable. I like the sealing around the nose, the cheeks, and the chin. You don't know you're wearing them after a while. They don't hurt like the 95, which are custom fitted often. I used to wear a 95 and I look like I got beat up some days because of how I had to wear it, custom fitted. I feel this kind of protection from a 94 mask. So I'm asking people to upgrade their mask and to realize that the vaccines are very important, but how we interact with each other is probably just as important once we're vaccinated.
Okay. Yeah, because I feel like should the alarm be sound like really loudly, people go back and let's really be cautious about what we're doing as we see this thing keeps mutating into something different. And as we hear that this latest one, it spreads more, and for me, it's people getting the right information because there's so much information out there, right? That what's the right information. The question is here is this: does wearing a mask at work if people are not around you not wearing a mask?
The problem with those around us not wearing a mask is that we don't know who is a carrier, who is asymptomatic, who within the next 3 to 5 days may have symptoms and have shedded the virus to a number of other individuals. I often tell my patients when there was no vaccination, there was always hope that we would be in a place where we could protect each other. I expected that when the vaccinations were available, like the polio vaccination of yesteryear and others that we took, we were lined up and we did what we had to do to protect ourselves, our families, our schools, and beyond. Today, we have question marks on legitimate interventions to keep us alive. The vaccinations are the foundation of everything that we need to do, but we have to supplement it with good common sense. Common sense can't be bought, can't be earned. It has to be inherent. That
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that? So if I have my mask on and people around me don't, am I protected or I should just run away from all people who don't have a mask on? You know what I'm saying?
I think that's a fundamentally important question. If you're wearing a proper mask that is protecting you and your family, all power to you. If those around you feel inclined not to be wearing a mask, they're making a statement about how they feel this disease is not transmitted. They don't recognize the science. They don't recognize the fact that a third of the people at any given time will be asymptomatic. I just watched a football game for about 5 minutes over the weekend. Michigan was playing Ohio State in Ann Arbor, Michigan. That's a frightening thought for me because there had to be somewhere between 60 and 80,000 people in the stands, principally maskless. Michigan right now has one of the lowest vaccination rates in the entire country at only 55%. And that includes individuals with only one vaccination, which I would not call protective enough. And yet, even including that number, it's only 55%. So think of all those people in that particular venue who could be exposed to individuals who have not even had a single vaccination. There are times when you have to think about the audience in which you keep. You're taking great risk. There were no masks being worn there. There's a classic example where you would want to wear a mask simply based on the information that I just gave you. That maybe it's not safe to be screaming and yelling. In fact, some of the worst data that we've ever seen in early COVID, before vaccinations were available, was the church itself. Our singing, our praising, our choirs were just amazingly affecting. We had actually seen data that the first 3 rows of the church was the highest prevalence of COVID from the choirs singing in front of them. The choirs themselves afflicted each other, and then those in immediate pews of the church. That there was COVID in the church, yes, but the first 3 or 4 rows was where the density was.
Because of airborne.
Airborne is what I really want to emphasize, not surface-borne, airborne.
Yeah, let's shift a minute. Can you talk to us about your spiritual journey and then where you are today?
I'm in a place that I'm very happy because my spirituality helps me rationalize human behavior. I recognize that I am an individual that deals with logic, but I'm living in illogical times. I've learned to be patient to listen to people who have different opinions than myself. I pull up chairs and I sit down and listen to my patients and try to understand from their perspective why they may disagree with my statements about what I consider the calamity of our lifetime. Infectious disease by far is the most important part of internal medicine and medicine overall. If you think about medicine, you think about surgeons, you think about anesthesiologists, ophthalmologists, you think about people who do procedures. If you have inflammation as defined by an infection, you can't operate. You can't operate successfully because you'll spread the vermin, in this case, the virus. There is nothing that we do in hospitals or in our clinics that are immune to the infectious reality of a virus of this infectivity. We have to sit down and praise the Lord that we have been blessed with technology that gives us a chance to live. We have to try to understand those who feel differently about the technology. And we have to give them multiple opportunities to be educated beyond social media. I feel blessed that my dean of my medical school at Cornell was Dr. Anthony Fauci. Dr. Fauci is the most brilliant human being I have ever met. As a freshman student, he made us feel that we were special, that we someday could be like him. He was inspirational. Without him, we would have not been able to conquer AIDS to the level we've conquered it, because at the NIH where he went to, he was able to take to the next level the funding at the governmental level to help us get on top of treatment regimens we take for granted today. And from that research, we were able to spin off things that we're doing with COVID-19 and other diseases. So God is good. In the midst of a calamity, we can solve problems and help us with other calamities in the future. So this is my spirituality. Science doesn't have all the answers, but we can give people hope with scientific methods. It's up to the people to make the decision what to do with them.
We also, yeah, that is very interesting. I like what you said. You could give people hope, right?
It's my favorite word. It's my favorite 4-letter word. Because what's the opposite, Grenetta? What's the opposite of hope? It's not hopelessness, it's despair.
Despair. Yeah, that's
I
it.
have fallen and I can't and won't get up.
Right. That's the opposite of hope. Right. We also, I also talk about the spiritual toolkit. What would you say are your top three spiritual practices?
Very good question. I get up every morning and I meditate.
Mm-hmm.
That's one, two, and three because the day begins thereafter.
Mm-hmm.
I look at each day as different than the day before, and I want to know what I'm going to learn new today that I didn't know yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a
I
good
am constantly reading, constantly asking questions, and not always getting answers. But if you don't ask the questions, you're never going to get the answers.
That's it. Yeah.
And I am always challenged by my patients. They say and do things that make me think and smile and laugh with them
Mm-hmm.
because I give you an example. There's a woman that traveled to see me on a regular basis from Delaware in the Rehoboth Beach area. I had no idea she lived that far south in Delaware. She travels 2.5 hours to see me 3 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
She gets dressed up and to come see her doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives me great joy because I spent extra time with her, not even realizing till today she was coming that far. She never told me, but she
Mm-hmm.
said she circles that date on the calendar because she wants to sit down with her doctor.
Mm-hmm.
That gives me great joy.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. Another thing that what would you say about the mental health crisis that we're in now? And have you seen anything change within your world around how to support this crisis we're in around mental health?
The mental health epidemic much preceded the pandemic, and
Mm-hmm.
people confuse the two.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell people that the story that I was told when the white man gets a cold, the people of color are suffering in the intensive care unit with pneumonia. Mental health imbalances, major depressive disorders, psychotic disorders, these schizoaffective disorders, these disorders have been rampant since pandemic has started. People can't get the service. If they have the finances, they have to rely on telemedicine. They have to rely on technology to even get their practitioners to be in front of them. And that's not always the easiest thing in the world. And when your finances are not right, your spirituality may be what it is, but you need all the help in the world to get the help that you need. I am seeing perhaps even more than a medical crisis, I'm seeing the mental health crisis as probably the fundamental, most important finding with COVID, leading to a disintegration of the family, a disabling of family units. I see this in my practice. My practice includes patients from Camden, New Jersey. I get to see inside people's homes that I thought were compensated before the pandemic, who are now, there are people there that used to give to shelters. They are now members of shelters.
Mm-hmm.
This mental health crisis has been devastating to people of color,
Mm-hmm.
particularly during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So I see it intertwined, though I didn't speak on that. One of my slides did, I didn't present, that if you look at the social determinants, mental health is number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, because from that comes all the other derangements,
Mm-hmm.
food insecurity, housing insecurity. There are people amongst us that were compensated where they could go and get a job and work. They're no longer able to do that. They lose their insurance, they lose their self respect. Our system with the bills in Washington right now give us hope because in the bill sitting in the Senate right now is a mental health contributing legislation that could make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hopeful that we get that passed because there is hope.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at our funding right now, we're underfunding mental health.
Mhm. And so funding is very important too. And I also think too educating people on the benefits of seeking help, is also important. And even in our communities where we don't necessarily always reach out for the support, push, encouraging people to go and get the help. But I heard you say it was a crisis pre-pandemic, right? And so since the pandemic, like the light has been shined on it, night is huger, right? I mean, I guess we're seeing more because of the food insecurities and everything that people are going through now. And I wonder how, I guess, as you said, if we get this money towards mental health, more funding towards mental health, then maybe we could see a difference and a change there. But I do think that, as you said, that is one of the number one things that I'm seeing as an issue.
Look at your streets of any major city. Listen to the voices of those that walk past you in their worlds beyond worlds. These are people who are unmedicated, undermedicated, can't afford their medication, can't afford therapy sessions. Look at the crime that's associated, the crime that these people now are sort of perpetrated on them, not so much on all the rest of us from them. And we blame the victim during these time periods. You listen to the media. There are parts of our media that is shamefully able to blame the victim. Even our own people sometimes get caught up in that blame cycle. I come from a background of mental health. My mother was a recreational therapist at a state mental hospital when they were called state mental hospitals. And I used to visit with her when we didn't have a babysitter. And I spent time behind locked wards with her. I know mental illness, and I know what the states like New York, New Jersey, and California in the 70s did. They turned these people out by zip code with underfunded situations in communities that could not and would not ever be ready to treat these people like human beings with social services such as recreational therapy, occupational therapy, psychological. They were all on paper. They were all to naught. So I have seen the roots of discontent with regard to mental health. Promises made, promises not kept.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I guess we go back to the whole idea of hope, right? We hope that there's a change, and we hope that there's funding, and we hope that there are ways that we can support people. But I feel there's um when I talk about spirituality, and I look at it from the perspective of, with everything you talked about, right? There's this sense of like, oh my God, it's all falling apart and what are we going to do? But then there's still this sense of finding peace. How do you still find peace to be in this world where all this chaos is, right? Or whatever we're seeing.
You change one life at a time. You have
Mm,
eye contact with your patients. Let me give you a philosophy that I've been working with for over 25 years, and it's a simple philosophical uh, terminology. A friend of mine, um, much more amazing than I ever will be. He's Latino. He's on the border of Mexico and Texas, and he has a slogan that he passed down to me. Uh, One of his patients told him 30 years ago the following statement: "Doctor, do you care about me?"
mm,
And she whispered under her breath. He never forgot it. He's passed it on to a few of us. And I always want my patients to feel that I care about them.
mm,
And I have that, when you speak about spirituality, seeing effectively how you could change people's lives, make them make better decisions to live a long life. The best revenge in life is to keep on living and living well,
mm,
knowing what resources you have in the community, voting for the people who have your best interests in mind,
mm,
avoiding rhetoric,
mm,
cut to the chase. What's in it for me and my family and my community? And recognizing that
mm,
for what it is. Those things are very important to me because if I could effectively change a life or two, let me give you an example before we go very quickly. I have a patient who's a Amtrak conductor who swore on Bibles, who swore that he would never get a vaccine despite his high risk job. We converted him. We were able to get not the first, the second, now he's got the third. He gave me a bear hug last week because I sat down and didn't condemn him for his thinking. I didn't call him out. I just tried to understand how he came to his decisions as an intelligent human being. He got the message. He got the message and took care of his family, took care of himself, and many others that he would have contact with in his workplace. Those are the things that I find spiritually happening for me because I changed one person's opinion that may save lives elsewhere.
And you took the time without judgment to sit with that person and listen and hear them out. And I think that's very important because we can quickly say, oh, how can they think like that? Because you have educated people who refuse to get the vaccine, right? So it goes across the board. You can't just say, oh, this person or that, but you have so many different people that refuse. So being able to hear that and talk to them, I think is really important, right? Because we could jump to conclusions about it all. And I have people who are vaccinated and some who are not. And I was thinking about, I have one friend that's not vaccinated, but she gets tests, she wears her mask, she does this whole thing. I didn't get into the whole conversation, but then I have another friend that is vaccinated and she's all everywhere, flying everywhere. I think I'd rather be around the one that's not, you know what I'm saying, that wears the mask and that's very careful. So it's all in the information, that people have and how they carry on in their lives, right? So yes, always this thing about vaccinated versus unvaccinated, and people have their reasons and trying to understand that.
You would think that once you're vaccinated, you were an ambassador to tell others that it didn't hurt, it didn't cause harm. We've analyzed the data from all of the three major vaccinations, compared and contrasted with that of the flu shot. It's very, very interesting how we forget the side effects of the flu shot.
Right.
And I also want to remind you that the best flu season we've ever had, the flu shot was only 65% effective in preventing the flu. How many people have told you over the years, I got a flu shot and I got the flu?
A lot of them, yeah.
And I tell them statistically, you're right, because we were never able to achieve what we wanted, over 90% protection. When they put these vaccinations together, these vaccines together, they were hoping to equal what the flu shot did. No one could predict that they would be able to get 90 to 95% across the board, whether your children or adult for that matter. It wasn't foreseen. And that's why I think it's incumbent upon us to understand the power of the science, because it could protect us. It could protect us and cocoon us from these variants that are coming along.
Let me ask you a question about that. What about the mixing? If you got corona, would you say you could go ahead and get the Pfizer booster, or should people really stick to the same booster? I got corona, Moderna, right?
Right.
All right. So what, Pfizer is just as impactful for me, because I'm thinking I need to go and find a place to get Moderna, but I'm seeing mostly Pfizer places.
Well, I like this question, an extremely important question. Thank you for asking it. I've looked at that data carefully. If you look at J&J's one and done, and you looked at Moderna or Pfizer afterwards, they gave the same level of protection. And vice versa, if you had Moderna for your initial two, and you got Pfizer for your third for availability issues, you are going to do the right thing. If you can't get the Moderna and you have to put that off for a week or two, God forbid you get infected in the meantime while you're waiting to match up your Moderna. So I
Mhm.
tell my patient it doesn't really matter from the data. We have to get the booster. And if
Mhm.
it's not the same as what you did for the first two, then that's okay too. And if you look at the J&J, people say, well, should I get J&J again? The data says you may not be able to find J&J as readily as Moderna and Pfizer. It's important to get the booster.
Okay. Okay. I think that was one of the questions that we really want. I myself was saying, well, no, I need to go find the same one because I'm not mixing my drugs or whatever, right?
Sure,
But
sure.
okay, great. That's good to know. Well, it is time for us to go. Would you like to leave people with one last message before we go?
The message is that of returning to my theme tonight. The opposite of hope is despair.
Mhm.
The humankind doesn't have to be in a despair mode. When you have hope, you have change, you have resilience, you have the ability to survive. Why not be a survivor?
Mhm. Mhm.
We don't want lemmings marching to the sea based on political rhetoric.
Mhm.
Show us a way that we can survive this calamity.
Mhm.
So we'll be empowered to deal with other calamities, protect our children, protect our neighbors, protect our families,
Mhm.
but forever do not give up hope that the human spirit will survive.
Mhm. Great. Well, thank you for joining us.
Sure,
And as you get more data, I'll call you back because we need to understand more of this, right? And thank you and
sure.
have a great day. I will be in touch.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining me tonight on Conversations with the Reverend G. And I'm here every Monday night from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. WEMS Radio Live. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and the WEMS app. I'd like to leave you today with the thought of hope, hope for the future. I'm Reverend G, and you can find me on Facebook, Reverend Grenetta Mason, on Instagram as Rev Grenetta, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will see you again next week. So live your best life with grace and ease.